The Galactic Concorde had explored countless worlds across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, cataloging over 9,000 sentient species. By the standards of its member races, first contact with yet another developing civilization should have been routine, almost boring. Delegate Taiho adjusted his atmospheric filter as he studied the holographic representation of Earth floating above the briefing table. A blue-green planet, unremarkable except for its unusually high biodiversity and the rapidly expanding technological footprint of its dominant species. Humans, he said, tasting the strange word. Resourceful creatures, if somewhat unfocused. His assistant Minna nodded, scrolling through the preliminary cultural assessment. They've gone from primitive flight to rudimentary space exploration in barely a century. Impressive acceleration curve. Yet they still fight among themselves, noted Taiho, zooming in on several ongoing regional conflicts. Typical of pre-Concorde civilizations, the Council of 13 had assigned Taiho to this mission, specifically because of his experience with warrior cultures. His own people had transitioned from constant warfare to peaceful technological development only 3 centuries earlier, practically yesterday in galactic terms. Classification recommendation, asked Elder Sunho, the eldest member of the observation team. Taiho considered for a moment. Primitive but promising. Standard observation protocols. Limited intervention only if they seem likely to destroy themselves. The decision was approved unanimously, and observation satellites were deployed in high orbit around Earth. For 3 months, the Concorde gathered data, translated languages, and prepared for eventual diplomatic contact. Every indication suggested humans would be suitable candidates for eventual Concorde membership, perhaps in another century or 2. That assessment changed on a warm July morning when Taiho's observation team detected unusual activity around a naval installation in a region humans called Virginia. "What are they doing to that vessel?" asked Mina, enhancing the satellite feed. The object of their curiosity was an enormous ship, a weapons platform called an aircraft carrier, according to their translation matrix. The U.S. Gerald R. Ford had been one of humanity's primary instruments of warfare just decades earlier. Now, workers swarmed over it like insects, stripping away gun emplacements and reconfiguring its massive flight deck. They appear to be decommissioning it, suggested one analyst. Taiho watched with growing confusion as the transformation continued over several weeks. The carrier's island superstructure was expanded and decorated with bright lights. The flight deck acquired structures that analysis indicated were recreational in nature. The weapons systems were replaced with entertainment facilities. They're turning a warship into a pleasure vessel, Taiho finally concluded, unable to hide his bewilderment. Commander Do-yun, who represented the Concorde's military interests on the observation mission, could barely contain his disgust. "This is worse than we thought. They don't even respect their own weapons of war." "Perhaps it indicates they're moving beyond warfare," suggested Minna hopefully. Do-yun snorted. "More likely it shows they're frivolous and unpredictable. Look at their entertainment. Simulated combat is their primary recreational activity. These creatures glorify war while treating actual weapons as toys." The debate might have remained academic if not for what happened next. The Concorde had maintained strict observation protocols, keeping their ships behind the moon and using only passive scanning technology. But a junior officer named Juho had taken a scout vessel on an unauthorized approach to examine humanity's primitive space station. "It's a marvel they haven't killed themselves," Juho reported as his ship maintained position 2 kilometers from the International Space Station. "Their life support systems are barely adequate. Their radiation shielding is practically non-existent. Return to position immediately," ordered Taiho, alarmed by this protocol breach. "We are not authorized for direct contact." "Just one more scan," Juho replied. "Their power generation systems are fascinating in their inefficiency." What happened next would be investigated for years. The human space station suddenly fired its thrusters, adjusting its position to avoid a piece of orbital debris. This sudden movement startled Juho's gunner, a young officer named Haniel who had been on high alert due to the unauthorized nature of their mission. Haniel's finger twitched on the defensive systems. The burst of energy, meant to be a warning shot, struck the station's solar array. The panel shattered, sending superheated fragments through the hull of the nearest module. 3 humans died instantly. Chaos erupted on both sides. The humans, having no idea who had attacked them or why, triggered planetary defense protocols. Primitive but effective missile systems targeted the now exposed Concorde vessel. Juo barely escaped, his ship damaged as it fled behind the moon. On Earth, panicked broadcasts filled every communication channel. Some blamed rival nations, others claimed alien invasion. Military forces worldwide went on high alert. Tahoe tried desperately to contain the situation. "We must establish communication immediately. Explain it was an accident." "Impossible," countered Doyun, who had assumed emergency command. "They're pre-contact primitives with nuclear weapons who believe they're under attack. Standard protocol requires containment until a proper response can be coordinated." "Containment? They've already seen us," argued Tahoe. "Precisely why we must act decisively," said Doyun. He turned to his tactical officer. "Deploy the fleet. Establish orbital superiority. We'll force an organized first contact on our terms." Tahoe watched in horror as 12 Concorde warships emerged from behind the moon, their silhouettes visible to even primitive Earth telescopes. "This is a catastrophic overreaction." "This is protocol," Doyun replied coldly. "They'll understand our superior technology makes resistance futile. Once they surrender, we'll explain the accident and establish proper diplomatic relations." But the human response defied all Concorde predictions. Instead of surrendering or attempting to negotiate, Earth's nations united with surprising speed. Their primitive spacecraft, previously used only for scientific missions, were hastily fitted with weapons. Military satellites were repositioned, and strangely, civilian vessels began to be modified for unclear purposes. Most puzzling of all, the massive carrier they had been converting, the U.S. Gerald R. Ford, was towed back to a military shipyard, its entertainment fixtures being rapidly removed. "What are they doing now?" asked Mina, monitoring communications from the Concorde flagship. "Something foolish," replied Doyun confidently. "Their weapons can't reach our ships. Their defenses can't stop our systems. This display of resistance is futile." Tahoe wasn't so certain. He'd studied enough emerging civilizations to recognize the dangerous combination of factors at play. Technological ingenuity, a willingness to repurpose existing tools, and now, the unifying effect of a perceived external threat. "I recommend caution," he advised. "These humans don't respond as our models predict." His warning came too late. Doyun had already dispatched an ultimatum to Earth's major governments, demanding immediate surrender and compliance with Concorde authority. The response came 3 hours later, not in words, but in action. A barrage of missiles launched from sites across Earth. Most were easily intercepted, but their purpose wasn't to damage the Concorde fleet. They were a distraction. Beneath the cover of these attacks, something else was happening. The U.S. Gerald R. Ford, a vessel that had symbolized humanity's confused priorities to the Concorde observers, had disappeared from its dock. And with it, Earth's response to the stars had begun to take shape. What should have been a routine first contact had become the opening act of an interstellar conflict that would change the galactic Concorde forever. And at the center of it all was a single perplexing question that even Tahoe couldn't answer. What exactly were these unpredictable humans planning to do with an obsolete aircraft carrier? Commander Doyun stood tall on the bridge of the Concorde flagship, the eternal vigilance. His 4-fingered hands were clasped behind his back as he stared at the blue-green planet displayed on the main view screen. 27 Concorde vessels now surrounded Earth in a perfect containment formation, their weapons systems powered and ready. "They'll surrender within days," he predicted confidently to his bridge officers. "These humans have never faced a unified external threat. Their fractured political systems cannot maintain cohesion under pressure. The commander smiled, revealing rows of small, pointed teeth. This mission would earn him significant prestige within the Concord. Handling a first contact crisis with minimal bloodshed would all but guarantee his promotion to the Admiralty Council. Analyst Juwu entered the bridge carrying a data tablet, her expression troubled. Unlike Doyun, who came from a primarily military species, Juwu's people were known throughout the galaxy for their analytical abilities. The subtle blue markings around her eyes pulsed with anxiety as she approached. "Commander, I've completed my assessment of human communication patterns over the last 72 hours, she said. The results are concerning. Doyun barely glanced at her. Concerning how? Are they preparing to launch more of their primitive missiles? We intercepted 97% of their first attack. That's just it, sir, Juwu continued. I don't believe that was an actual attack. It appears to have been a test of our defensive capabilities and response times. This caught Doyun's attention. Explain. Juwu activated her tablet, displaying intercepts of human military communications. They're not preparing peace terms or surrender protocols. They're mobilizing. Every major shipyard has shifted to 24-hour operations. Retired military personnel are being recalled to active duty. And most puzzling of all, they're moving civilian vessels into military installations. What could they possibly hope to accomplish? Asked Doyun. Their technological level is at least 3 centuries behind ours. I don't know, admitted Juwu. But there's more. One of their largest military vessels, designated U.S. Constellation, has disappeared from its dock in a region called San Diego. Doyun laughed. Disappeared. A vessel of that size cannot simply disappear. Our sensors would detect it. That's what concerns me, said Juwu. We've scanned every ocean on the planet. The vessel isn't there. Either they've developed some method of concealing it from our sensors, or what? Or they've moved it somewhere we haven't thought to look. Doyun dismissed her concerns with a wave. Let them tinker with their obsolete vessels. It changes nothing. Their most advanced warships are powered by primitive fission reactors. Their weapons can barely reach orbit. Their defensive systems cannot withstand even our scout vessels. Juwu remained silent, but she continued to study her data. Something about the human response pattern troubled her deeply. Most species, when faced with overwhelmingly superior technology, either surrendered or attempted desperate, futile attacks. The humans were doing neither. They were building something. In the following days, Concord sensors detected unusual activity in shipyards across Earth. Old vessels were being cut apart, their components repurposed. Space launch facilities operated nonstop, sending small payloads into orbit on trajectories designed to avoid Concord patrols. And everywhere, humans worked with a unified purpose that belied Doyun's prediction of political fracturing. They're taking apart cruise ships now, reported a junior officer 1 week into the blockade, cutting up their own luxury vessels for parts. And what exactly do they think they'll accomplish with pieces of pleasure craft? Asked Doyun mockingly. Unknown, sir, but they're doing the same with oil platforms, commercial satellites, even parts of decommissioned power plants. Juwu spent hours analyzing the patterns, trying to understand the human strategy. Their behavior defied conventional response models. Instead of consolidating their military resources for defense or attack, they seemed to be deliberately dismantling them, redistributing components in ways that made no tactical sense. On the 10th day of the standoff, she requested a private meeting with Commander Doyun. I believe we're missing something fundamental about human engineering philosophy, she explained, showing him comparison charts of known technological development patterns. Most species develop technology in a linear fashion, building increasingly sophisticated versions of the same basic designs. Yes, of course, said Doyun impatiently. That's the standard development curve. Humans don't follow it, Juwu continued. They appear to advance in sporadic bursts, often by repurposing existing technology for entirely new applications. Their history is filled with examples of taking components designed for one purpose and combining them in unexpected ways to solve completely different problems. Do-Yun's irritation was visible. What exactly are you suggesting, analyst? I'm suggesting that we cannot predict their response based on their current technological level alone. They approach problems differently. And right now, they see us as a very big problem. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across Do-Yun's face, but his military training quickly reasserted itself. Your concerns are noted, analyst, but the fact remains that they cannot match our capabilities regardless of how creative their thinking might be. The laws of physics don't change based on ingenuity. As the second week of the standoff began, the first signs of Do-Yun's predicted surrender appeared. Several human governments transmitted requests for communication channels. The commander was pleased. You see, Ju, they're ready to accept reality. But the analyst noticed something odd about the timing of these requests. They always coincided with unusual energy fluctuations from Earth's surface, almost as if they're stalling, she realized suddenly. The diplomatic overtures are coordinated with their engineering operations. They're buying time. Before she could bring this to Do-Yun's attention, the sensor officer called out, "Commander, we're detecting an unusual energy signature from the dark side of Earth's moon." The main view screen shifted to show the lunar surface. There, partially hidden in the shadow of a crater, was a construction facility that hadn't been there when the Concorde arrived. How did they build that so quickly? Do-Yun demanded. They didn't build it, Ju realized. They assembled it from prefabricated components. Their International Space Station. They've cannibalized it. Further sensor suites revealed more surprises. Small, stealth satellites had been positioned throughout Earth orbit, using minimal power to avoid detection. Deep-sea construction had been underway in Earth's oceans, creating what appeared to be launch platforms of some kind. And most concerning of all, radiation signatures suggested that dozens of the humans' primitive nuclear reactors had been moved from their original locations. Where is the UNS constellation? Do-Yun suddenly demanded. The missing carrier had become something of an obsession for him. Expand our scans, check orbital trajectories, underwater signatures, anything. Sir, a sensor officer replied hesitantly. We've been looking. There's no trace of it anywhere on Earth or in its orbit. Do-Yun turned to Ju, his confidence finally showing cracks. What are they doing? What strategy could possibly make sense against our technological advantage? Ju studied the incoming data, the blue markings around her eyes pulsing rapidly as she processed the information. I don't know exactly what they're building, Commander, but I believe we've significantly underestimated human adaptability. She hesitated before adding, and I'm beginning to think they don't view technology the way we do. To the Concorde, technology advances through refinement and precision. But humans, they seem to view technology as something malleable, flexible. They don't see the intended purpose of a tool as its only purpose. Do-Yun stared at the view screen, watching the frenzied activity across Earth with new eyes. For the first time, a sense of unease settled over him. Monitor all unusual energy signatures, he ordered, and prepare a report for Concorde High Command. I want reinforcements. The commander would never admit it openly, but as he watched humans transform their world below, converting cruise ships into component factories and oil rigs into launch platforms, he was beginning to suspect that these primitive creatures might be more dangerous than anyone in the Concorde had imagined. Not because of their technology, which remained centuries behind, but because they simply refused to accept the limitations that technology should impose. 97 days after the disastrous first contact, the skies above Earth's North Pacific trembled. Clouds parted as something massive pushed through the atmosphere. Concorde sensors immediately locked onto the disturbance, and alarm signals blared across all 27 ships in the blockade formation. Unknown vessel emerging from Earth's atmosphere, reported the sensor officer aboard the Eternal Vigilance. Size exceeds any previously observed human craft. Commander Do-Yun rushed to the bridge, still adjusting his uniform. He had been resting after weeks of increasing frustration. The humans had continued their strange, scattered activities, but had shown no signs of either surrender or significant military response. "Show me," he ordered. The main view screen displayed a colossal vessel rising through the last wisps of Earth's upper atmosphere. Its hull was a patchwork of different materials, some sections gleaming with fresh metal, others clearly repurposed from existing structures. The vessel's overall shape resembled an elongated rectangle with a flat-top surface. "Identification," demanded Do-Yun. "It's broadcasting a transponder signal," the communications officer replied with evident confusion. "Identifying itself as UN's Constellation." A murmur ran through the bridge crew. The missing carrier had been an ongoing mystery, with Do-Yun ordering increasingly desperate search efforts as the weeks passed. "Impossible," the commander said. "The Constellation was a primitive ocean vessel. This is a spacecraft." Tahoe, who had been largely sidelined since the conflict began, had been quietly allowed back onto the bridge as an observer. He stared at the screen in astonishment. "It was a primitive ocean vessel," he whispered. "They've converted the entire superstructure into a battle platform." The sensor officer's voice shook slightly as he reported, "The vessel is approximately 1,100 meters in length. Power readings indicate multiple nuclear fission reactors operating in conjunction. Its outer hull appears to incorporate components from their space station and commercial satellite dishes." Do-Yun couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could they possibly make an ocean vessel spaceworthy in just 3 months? Analyst Chu, who had been continuously studying human adaptation patterns, looked up from her data screens. "They didn't try to make it fully spaceworthy, Commander. Look at the design. It's meant for low-orbit operations only. They didn't rebuild it to our standards. They'd rebuilt it to serve a specific purpose." On the screen, the massive vessel continued its ascent, trailing atmospheric particles as it reached the edge of space. Its movement was ungainly compared to Concorde ships, but there was something undeniably impressive about the makeshift behemoth. "They're hailing us," announced the communications officer. "All frequencies, all Concorde vessels." Do-Yun hesitated, then nodded. "Put it through." The screen shifted to show a human male in what appeared to be a hastily designed uniform. Behind him was a bridge unlike any conventional spacecraft, a mixture of traditional naval equipment, modern digital interfaces, and what looked like repurposed civilian technology. "Attention Concorde vessels. This is Captain Minho of the Earth Defense Force, commanding the UNS Constellation. 3 months ago, you fired upon our space station without provocation, killing 3 of our people. You then positioned your fleet to blockade our world, expecting surrender." The human paused, his expression resolute. "The Constellation isn't just a warship," he transmitted. "It's a statement. Humanity will not surrender to intimidation, no matter the technological gap between us." Do-Yun scoffed. "This demonstration is impressive, Captain, but changes nothing. Your vessel, while large, poses no threat to our fleet. Your weapons cannot penetrate our shields. Your hull would collapse under sustained fire from even our smallest ships." Captain Minho smiled. "Perhaps, but I invite you to scan our vessel more thoroughly before you reach that conclusion." Do-Yun nodded to his sensor officer, who initiated a detailed scan of the human vessel. As the results came in, the officer's expression changed from dismissive to concerned. "Sir, they've mounted what appear to be electromagnetic railguns along the flight deck. Primitive, but potentially effective in vacuum. And there's something else." He paused, recalibrating his instruments. "They've somehow created a rudimentary shield system using. I don't understand these readings." Jumu moved to the sensor station, studying the data herself. "They've repurposed their nuclear reactors to power experimental shield generators. The design is crude but innovative, using principles similar to our own shields, but approached from an entirely different theoretical framework." "How is that possible?" demanded Do-Yun. "They couldn't have developed shield technology independently in 3 months." Tahoe's eyes widened as realization struck him. They didn't develop it independently. They reverse-engineered it. He turned to Do-hyun. The scout ship, Juho's vessel that fired on their space station. It was damaged during escape and lost components in Earth orbit. You think they recovered the debris and reverse-engineered our shield technology? Do-hyun asked incredulously. Not completely, Juho said, still analyzing the data. They couldn't possibly understand the full principles, but they identified key components and adapted them to work with their existing technology. It's remarkable improvisation. On the screen, Captain Minho waited patiently for their response. Behind him, the bridge crew of the Constellation worked with focused intensity, many operating equipment that had clearly been designed for entirely different purposes. The scout ship's debris couldn't have provided enough information for this level of adaptation, Do-hyun insisted. Taeho and Juho exchanged glances. Unless, Taeho suggested quietly. This wasn't the first contact after all. Before Do-hyun could respond, the sensor officer called out, "Sir, we're detecting energy signatures from lunar orbit. Multiple small vessels emerging from hiding positions." The view screen split to show dozens of small craft appearing from behind lunar features, from Earth's upper atmosphere, and even rising from oceanic launch platforms. None were larger than Concorde scout ships, but there were hundreds of them, each broadcasting identification signals: UNS Defiant, UNS Resistance, UNS Unity. "What is this?" Do-hyun demanded. Captain Minho answered from the screen. "While the Constellation was our most visible project, it wasn't our only one. For 3 months, we've been building a fleet, not with advanced technology, but with human ingenuity. Converting submarines, aircraft, satellites, and anything else we could use." "This is still futile," Do-hyun insisted, though his voice lacked its previous confidence. "Your numbers don't compensate for your technological disadvantage." "Perhaps," Minho acknowledged. "But there's something you should know about humans, Commander. We've been studying your people far longer than you think." The sensor officer's console suddenly lit up with new alerts. "Sir, we're detecting energy signatures from the Constellation. They're powering weapons systems. And there's something else, an energy pattern I don't recognize." Aboard the Constellation, Captain Minho stood before his crew, a mixture of naval officers, civilian engineers, and scientists who had worked tirelessly to transform an obsolete aircraft carrier into humanity's first true spacecraft. The vessel around them was a testament to human adaptability, a patchwork of technologies never meant to work together, somehow functioning as a cohesive whole. For 50 years, Minho continued his transmission to the Concorde fleet. "We've been reverse engineering technology from a scout ship that crashed in a place called Roswell. We kept it secret, even from most of our own people. We weren't ready for first contact, but we weren't completely unprepared either." On the eternal vigilance, Do-hyun's confident demeanor finally cracked. "Tactical analysis," he barked. Juho stepped forward. "The Constellation appears to be a distraction, Commander. Its size and obvious modifications draw attention, but the real threat may be the smaller vessels. Their distributed formation suggests a coordinated attack strategy against ships they can't possibly damage," Do-hyun retorted. "Sir," the sensor officer interrupted, "the Constellation is activating some kind of energy projection device. It's unlike anything in our database." On the view screen, Captain Minho allowed himself a small smile. "We may be centuries behind you in most technologies, Commander Do-hyun, but there's one advantage humans have always possessed. We adapt. We repurpose. We look at something designed for one function and imagine how it could serve another." He gestured to the bridge around him. "This carrier was meant to launch aircraft over oceans. Now it launches humanity's response to the stars, not as a perfect vessel, but as a platform for something you never expected us to possess." The energy readings from the Constellation peaked, and a visible glow began to emanate from an array mounted where aircraft elevators had once been. "Sir," the sensor officer reported with growing alarm, "they're generating some form of targeted energy field. It's It's affecting our sensor systems. Across the Concorde fleet, ship systems began reporting anomalies. Navigation computers displayed conflicting coordinates. Communication channels filled with static. Sensor readings became unreliable. Aboard the Constellation, Captain Minho looked directly into the transmission camera. "The Constellation isn't just a warship," he repeated. "It's a statement that humanity will not be conquered. Not today. Not ever." As the massive vessel hung in orbit, surrounded by its makeshift fleet of converted Earth vessels, the Concorde's superior forces found themselves facing something they hadn't anticipated. Not just a technologically inferior species fighting against impossible odds, but a species that had fundamentally reimagined what was possible with the technology they possessed. The Constellation retreated from Earth orbit with surprising speed for such a massive vessel. Its engines, a hybrid system combining human nuclear propulsion with reversed-engineered alien technology, left a distinctive radiation trail that Concorde sensors could easily track. The makeshift human fleet scattered in all directions, some returning to Earth, others taking positions in high orbit or near the Moon. Commander Do-Yun watched the Constellation's trajectory with growing frustration. For 2 weeks, the human vessel had played a game of hit and run, appearing just long enough to disrupt Concorde operations before withdrawing beyond effective weapons range. The interference device it carried, whatever it was, seemed capable of temporarily scrambling Concorde navigation and targeting systems, but only at relatively close range. "They're toying with us," Do-Yun growled, studying the tactical display on the bridge of the Eternal Vigilance. "These demonstrations are designed to make us look foolish." Analyst Juwu, who had been monitoring the Constellation's movements, looked up from her station. "Sir, the human vessel has altered course again. They appear to be heading toward the outer solar system." "Show me," Do-Yun ordered. The main view screen displayed the Constellation's projected path, a long arc that would take it past Mars and into the asteroid belt beyond. "What are they planning?" Do-Yun wondered aloud. "There's nothing of strategic value out there. Unless," Juwu hesitated, "they're trying to draw us away from Earth." Do-Yun considered this possibility. The standoff had reached a stalemate. The human vessel could disrupt Concorde operations, but couldn't actually defeat the technologically superior fleet. Meanwhile, the Concorde blockade remained in place, preventing Earth from developing its space capabilities further. After a moment's thought, Do-Yun made his decision. Order the fleet to pursue. Leave 5 vessels to maintain the Earth blockade. "All ships, Commander?" asked his second-in-command, sounding uncertain. "Yes, we'll end this ridiculous situation once and for all." Do-Yun's 4-fingered hand clenched into a fist. They'd backed themselves into a corner. "One obsolete vessel against our fleet. This ends today." The Concorde vessels accelerated smoothly, their advanced drives allowing them to quickly gain on the fleeing Constellation. The pursuit continued for days, the distance between hunter and hunted gradually shrinking as they passed the orbit of Mars. Aboard the Constellation, Captain Minho stood on the command deck, watching the tactical display with calm determination. The massive vessel vibrated constantly, a reminder that it had never been designed for space travel. Emergency repairs were ongoing throughout the ship, with crews working around the clock to keep systems functional. "Concorde fleet is maintaining pursuit, Captain," reported his tactical officer. 22 vessels, including their flagship. Minho nodded. "And the Earth blockade?" "Reduced to 5 ships, as we predicted." A smile crossed Minho's weathered face. "Then Phase 1 is complete. Set course for Jupiter. Maximum sustainable speed." The Constellation's engines flared brighter as the vessel adjusted its trajectory toward the massive gas giant that dominated the outer solar system. Behind it, the Concorde fleet adjusted course to match. In a laboratory deep within the Constellation's reproposed hull, Dr. Jisu worked feverishly on a device that resembled nothing in human engineering textbooks. Parts of it were clearly alien, salvaged components from the Roswell crash site that had been studied in secret for decades. Other sections were distinctly human, improvised adaptations that connected the alien technology to systems the constellation could power and control. "Will it work?" asked Minho, who had come to check on her progress. Jisoo didn't look up from her calculations. "In theory, yes. In practice," she shrugged. "We've never tested it on this scale. Jupiter's gravity well is orders of magnitude more powerful than anything we used in our trials. But if it works, Jisoo said, finally meeting his eyes, we create a gravitational lens effect that will completely distort space-time around the Concorde fleet. Their navigation systems will fail. Their weapons targeting will be useless. For a short time, we'll have the advantage." Minho placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's all we need, just a short time." As the constellation approached Jupiter, the massive planet filled the viewports. Swirling storms larger than Earth itself moved across its surface, while its powerful magnetic field created radiation levels that required additional shielding throughout the vessel. The Concorde fleet had closed to within weapons range, but held their fire. Commander Do-hyun was puzzled by the human vessel's choice of destination. "What possible strategic value does this gas giant offer them?" he asked Ju. She studied the sensor readings carefully. Jupiter has intense radiation belts and the strongest gravitational field in the system besides the Sun. Perhaps they believe these natural phenomena will provide some form of cover. Do-hyun snorted. "Our sensors can penetrate any natural interference they might hope to use. Order the fleet to form attack pattern Delta. We'll surround them and end this chase." The Concorde vessels spread out, forming a three-dimensional net around the approaching constellation. Weapons systems powered up, target locks engage. "Sir," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." "Ignore it," Do-hyun commanded. "They've had their chance to surrender. Weapons free on my mark." Before he could give the order, the sensor officer called out in alarm. "Sir, energy spike from the constellation. They're activating some kind of device." On the constellation's bridge, Captain Minho watched as Jupiter filled their forward viewports. "We're in position," he announced. "All hands, secure for gravitational distortion. Dr. Jisoo, are you ready?" In her laboratory, Jisoo made a final adjustment to the alien device. "Ready, Captain." Minho took a deep breath. Everything depended on this moment. "Activate the lens." The device hummed to life, drawing massive power from the constellation's straining reactors. A barely visible distortion field extended from the vessel toward Jupiter, like ripples in space itself. Aboard the Eternal Vigilance, chaos erupted. "Navigation systems failing," shouted one officer. "Sensor readings are distorted," called another. "Weapons targeting is offline." Do-hyun gripped the arms of his command chair as the view screen showed impossible readings. Jupiter seemed to warp before their eyes, its gravitational field somehow magnified and focused by whatever the humans had activated. "What's happening?" he demanded. Ju stared at her readings in astonishment. "They've created some kind of gravitational lens effect, using Jupiter's natural gravity as an amplifier. It's distorting space-time around our fleet." "Impossible," Do-hyun whispered. "That technology is beyond even the Concorde." As the Concorde fleet struggled to maintain control of their vessels in the distorted space, a new threat emerged. From behind Jupiter's moons, Ganymede, Callisto, Europa, and Io, dozens of smaller human vessels appeared. They had been hiding in the radiation shadow of the moons, completely invisible to Concorde sensors. "Sir, multiple contacts emerging from Jupiter's moons," the sensor officer reported frantically. "They're smaller vessels, but they're moving fast." Unlike the constellation, these craft were built for speed and maneuverability. Many appeared to be converted from Earth spacecraft, never meant for combat, now armed with makeshift weapons and protected by jury-rigged shields based on the same reverse-engineered technology. Captain Minho's voice echoed across all Concorde communications channels. "Commander Do-hyun, You believed one obsolete vessel couldn't stand against your fleet. You were right. That's why we brought more. The human vessels swarmed toward the disoriented Concorde ships. Their weapons were primitive by Concorde standards, but with the alien fleet's defensive systems compromised by the gravitational distortions, even simple kinetic projectiles could cause damage. Return fire, Doyon ordered, but the command was futile. Targeting systems couldn't lock on through the spatial distortions, and manual targeting was nearly impossible with the human vessels moving so erratically. The smaller human ships executed precision strikes against Concorde vessels, focusing fire on propulsion and weapon systems. They didn't attempt to destroy the alien ships, merely disable them. They're not trying to win, Ju realized, watching the tactical display. They're trying to demonstrate that they can fight. 3 Concorde vessels lost engine power. 2 more reported weapons systems failures. The rest struggled to maintain formation as the gravitational lens continued to disrupt their systems. Aboard the Constellation, Dr. Jisu monitored the alien device with growing concern. "Captain, the lens is becoming unstable. The power requirements are exceeding our capacity to control it. How much longer can you maintain it?" Minho asked. 5 minutes, maybe less. Minho nodded and opened a channel to the human fleet. "All vessels, execute final attack runs and prepare for withdrawal. Remember your targets." The smaller human ships made one last coordinated strike, focusing on the eternal vigilance itself. They couldn't penetrate its armor, but they managed to disable its primary propulsion and main weapons array. As the gravitational lens began to collapse, Captain Minho transmitted once more to Commander Doyon. "This battle is over, Commander. But remember what happened here today. Humans may not have your technology, but we will never surrender our freedom. Not to you. Not to anyone." The lens device finally failed, its alien components burning out from the strain. As the spatial distortions faded, the human vessels retreated behind Jupiter's moons, using the radiation to cover their withdrawal. When the Concorde fleet finally regained full control of their systems, they found themselves damaged, disoriented, and facing a stark new reality. These humans, whom they had dismissed as primitive and easily conquered, had fought the most advanced fleet in the galaxy to a standstill. The Battle of Jupiter would forever change galactic politics, not because humans had won. They hadn't, not in any conventional sense, but they had proven something perhaps more important. Technological superiority alone was not enough to ensure victory against a species willing to reimagine the very rules of engagement. "We never built better weapons," explained Administrator Hyunwoo to the assembled Concorde Peace Council. "We simply used what we had differently." The Grand Chamber fell silent as the human delegates' words echoed through the space. Representatives from 27 advanced civilizations studied the small, unimposing figure standing before them. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Jupiter, and this formal peace negotiation marked humanity's official recognition by the Galactic Concorde. Elder Sunho, who had once been part of the original observation team, leaned forward. "Please elaborate, Administrator. Our understanding of technological development follows clear, progressive paths. Your approach seems chaotic by comparison." Hyunwoo smiled. Behind him, a holographic display showed the UNS Constellation, now orbiting Earth as a monument to human ingenuity. The massive vessel had been partially restored to its original aircraft carrier configuration, though many of its space-based modifications remained as reminders of its historic journey. "To you, technology evolves through specialization," Hyunwoo explained. "Each tool becomes more refined for its specific purpose. But humans ask different questions. We don't just ask, 'How can we make this better?' We ask, 'What else could this become?'" The display shifted to show images of the constellation's transformation, from sea vessel to space platform to diplomatic symbol. An aircraft carrier was designed to project military power across oceans. Hyunwoo continued. "We saw it could become an entertainment venue during peacetime. Then, when threatened, we saw it could become a space vessel." Now it serves as a symbol of our place in the galaxy. The object remained the same. Our perception of its purpose changed. Delegate Taiho, who had been reinstated to his position after Doyen's failure, nodded thoughtfully. This adaptability is what we failed to anticipate. Our models predicted you would either surrender or launch a conventional doomed resistance. Those were the only logical options, agreed a representative from the Phyrexian systems. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Logic depends on shared assumptions. Hyunmu replied. You assumed technology had fixed purposes. We assumed everything could be reimagined. The peace negotiations continued for weeks. The final treaty contained provisions that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Earth was recognized as a sovereign power within its own solar system. A cultural exchange program would be established. Most importantly, humanity would join the Concord not as a subordinate species, but as an equal member with unique contributions to offer. Analyst Chu, who had been instrumental in helping the Concord understand human behavior, presented her final report to the Council. The Battle of Jupiter wasn't really a battle in traditional terms, she explained. It was a demonstration. Humans knew they couldn't defeat our fleet, but they didn't need to. They only needed to show they could fight effectively enough to make conquest impractical. A clever strategy, admitted Elder Sunho, and one that reveals much about their thinking. They sought not victory, but equilibrium. As news of the treaty spread throughout the galaxy, the constellation became an object of fascination for many species. Delegations traveled to Earth orbit just to observe the vessel that had challenged the Concord's most fundamental assumptions about technological development. Captain Minho, now promoted to Admiral of Earth's new cooperative space fleet, often conducted tours for important visitors. The gravitational lens was perhaps our most dramatic adaptation. He explained to a group of Concord scientists, showing them the laboratory where Dr. Jisu had created the device. But in many ways, it was the least impressive. Every component of this ship represented a reimagining of existing technology. He guided them through corridors where nuclear submarine systems had been repurposed for life support, where satellite dishes had been converted to sensor arrays, where aircraft elevators had become spacecraft launch bays. Fascinating, commented one scientist. On my world, we would have discarded these obsolete systems and designed purpose-built replacements. That approach has advantages, Minho acknowledged. Your technology is far more efficient, more elegant, but our approach offered something you hadn't considered, speed of adaptation. We couldn't build better technology fast enough to match yours, but we could reimagine our existing technology overnight. The most unexpected outcome of the Human Concord Treaty was the cultural impact it had on Concord species themselves. Ideas about technological repurposing spread rapidly. Worlds that had followed rigid development paths for centuries began experimenting with alternative applications for existing systems. Not everyone welcomed this change. Commander Doyen, demoted after his failure at Jupiter and reassigned to a minor administrative position, watched with growing horror as his own people embraced the human approach. On his homeworld, he stood before the stalwart Victory, once the pride of his species' fleet. The massive warship had been decommissioned following the peace treaty. Now, workers swarmed over it, removing weapons systems and reconfiguring internal spaces. What are they doing to it? He asked a passing engineer, though he already feared the answer. Converting it, the engineer replied enthusiastically. It's becoming the first interspecies cultural center in this sector. The main weapons bay will house art exhibitions. The command deck is being transformed into a conference facility. Isn't it wonderful? Do-Yun felt physically ill. They're stripping away its purpose, its dignity. The engineer looked confused. Not at all. They're giving it a new purpose. The humans taught us that a tool isn't defined by its original function, but by what we choose to do with it. As Do-Yun walked away from the construction site, his hands trembled with suppressed emotion. They're not just changing technology, he muttered to himself. They're changing how we think about it. Back on Earth, the human approach to the Concorde relationship continued to evolve. Dr. Jisu led a new research institution dedicated to studying alien technology, not to copy it, but to understand the principles behind it and imagine new applications. The gravitational lens was just the beginning. She explained to a class of eager students. We combined Concorde spatial manipulation technology with our understanding of Jupiter's natural properties. Neither they nor we had considered that combination before. A student raised her hand. But now that we're at peace, why continue this research? The Concorde will share their technology with us. Jisu smiled. Because we don't want to simply adopt their technology. We want to see it differently than they do. That's humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not better tools, but new ways of seeing what tools can become. As the months passed, the new equilibrium solidified. Human representatives joined Concorde councils. Concorde species established cultural centers on Earth. The knowledge exchange moved in both directions, creating a relationship unlike any the galaxy had seen before. Administrator Hyunwoo, speaking at the one-year anniversary of the peace treaty, summarized the new reality. The constellation stands in orbit not as a reminder of conflict, but as a symbol of transformation. It began as a tool of war, became a tool of resistance, and now serves as a bridge between worlds. He gestured to the diverse audience before him, humans and aliens sitting together in what had once been the constellation's massive hangar deck, now converted into a diplomatic hall. This vessel teaches us all an important lesson. Nothing is only what it was made to be. Everything can become something new if we have the courage to reimagine it. In the back of the hall, a group of Concorde engineers huddled excitedly around design plans. They were already working on new hybrid technologies that combined Concorde precision with human adaptability. Vessels that could transform their functions as needed. Energy systems that could repurpose waste products in innovative ways. Communication networks that evolved based on usage patterns. The galaxy was changing. Not because humans had defeated the Concorde. They hadn't. Not because humans had superior technology. They didn't. But because when faced with an aircraft carrier, humans had asked a question the Concorde would never have considered. What else could this become? And in doing so, they had changed the course of galactic history.